Greetings, YouTube. Today I'm going to talk about the latest non-fiction book that I have just finished reading. The full title is Sex with Kings, 500 Years of Adultery, Power, Rivalry, and Revenge by Eleanor Herman. This particular volume I read had a PS section which had notes by the author about what she went to, the process she had of writing the book. The first thing I noticed about this book that I happened to enjoy was that it was written in fairly short passages. And most of the non-fiction books I read at work. So I have like 10 minutes here and 20 minutes there. So I like a book that has short passages, nice, easily accessible breakpoints, both in the page itself and in the thought process. You know, when there's a breakpoint in the page, it usually means some thought is concluding before the next passage begins. And that gives me a good point to stop, and I can also dwell on what I had just read conveniently before I start the next passage. And in fact, I commented about this to my wife about it. And when I read the end of the book, the PS section, Miss Herman talks about the fact that she is a trained journalist and spent years working in periodicals, newspapers, and magazines. And that explains why she was so comfortable writing in that style. I don't even know if she's aware she was doing it. It may have just been reflex at this point. But it made the book very readable, very approachable. The whole tone of the book is fairly light. It is not what I would call a hard read in any sense of the word. And this book really does cover all these of the really big named mistresses that were made famous during the 500-year reign of the classical European monarchs, all the way up to the King Prince Charles and Camilla. Though that was more of an afterthought than anything, because the last of the really great monarchs and their mistresses kind of died out for the most part in the French Revolution, because the French were really the ones that did this big. Some of the other monarchies did continue the tradition into the 19th and obviously into the 20th century, but they became much less prominent, and everything got scaled down. Things weren't quite as extravagant. Things weren't as power hungry, maybe, and they had a lot less power. The mistresses in the latter period didn't have the kind of power that the early ones did, because the early mistresses, for while they were in power, had a lot of it. They could make policies. They could make or break ministers. Nobles sucked up to them big time because they were so important politically. They literally had the ear and other parts of the king. And one of the things that both the author and I found interesting is that quite a few of the monarchs kept mistresses that weren't stunningly beautiful. Yes, they all had, at one time or another, had beautiful mistresses. But if they were just attractive and they didn't have something else to offer, they didn't last very long. The ones that lasted were the ones that had something else to offer. The ones that were good conversationalists, that knew how to please the monarch, knew how to make his life easier. Particularly in that almost every one of these monarchs was going to be married to someone that they didn't choose, that they didn't want to be married to, that it was a state duty of theirs to have heirs with this woman that they had no desire to be with. So the mistress was someone they wanted to be with. And they frequently treated their children better than they treated their own, the official heirs, because again, they were having children with the women that they desired to be in the company of. And some mistresses were picked, some were groomed for the job by their families. Some did everything they could within their power to get themselves into a position where they would be chosen to be a mistress, kind of making your own luck kind of situation. One of the Louis, I can't remember which one it was, had 4 sisters in the same family. He must have really liked that family line. But overall, it was an enjoyable read. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot of information out of it. I had a good time. Copies of this book can be found on Amazon used in paperback for 30 cents, $1 for the hardcover. I had a softcover version. I very rarely ever buy hardcover books. They just take too much space up on my shelves. Softcovers take up less space, tend to be smaller, and less expensive. But I definitely, if you have any interest in court politics in the era of the classical mistress and the monarchs and the nobility that were all wrapped around it. This is definitely a book I think would be a good starting place. I have a number of books that I haven't gotten to that deal kind of with the same theme, and a number of that deal with different family lines of nobility. I need to get around to reading those. But this definitely is a good starting point, I think. I enjoyed it. I recommend it. And anyone out there who's a gamer, this is very useful to get a really inside slant on how the politics of the court and their interpersonal relationships could really be used in a role-playing game. I think it's very applicable to a game, particularly if it's based on a city, or it's based, it has a lot of internal politicking. If some of the members of the group are nobles of some variety, I think this book would definitely be of a help to a player or a GM who wanted to add that kind of an angle to a campaign. So definitely, Sex with Kings, comes highly recommended.